No, it doesn't say that in Dostoevsky. That's Sartre's appropriation and rephrasing. Oh, hi. I'm Layman Pascal, and welcome to a very special edition of the Integral Stages Meta Podcast series. We usually talk with people who are starting or in the midst of a liminal, integrative, meta-modern, developmental, or transformational or regenerative podcast project, but today we're looking back on one that's been recently completed. Who knows if it will resurrect in the future, but we spoke with Doctors Jen and Sally when they were just starting the Radical Emergence podcast, in which they jointly explored the theory and lived experience of both general and specifically psychological transformation. They committed to a set of discussions and enlivening audio play with each other, and they have now fulfilled that intention. I'm joined by both of them for post-dinner drinks and a reflective look back on what they've accomplished and what they've learned. Welcome.
Hi, Layman.
Hi, Layman. Hi, everybody. Good to be back. Thanks, Layman.
Just to start very generally, how does it feel to be on the other side of this project?
Go ahead, Jen.
It feels like an ending wrapped up in a beginning. It feels exciting to, commit to a big project and be on the flip side of finishing it. We learned a lot. But I think what I feel mostly right now is real excitement for taking everything we've learned and all the gifts we've been given and all the feedback we've been given and take that and apply it to new projects.
Yeah, Jen, it's been an extraordinary year, hasn't it? And we'd really love to share with listeners the challenges and gifts of co-creating with somebody and venturing into a year-long research project. That was a massive undertaking. And so we'd love to share our takeaways. And specifically, when I was looking at that, and Layman kindly asked us to share that with our listeners so that they too can start using their voices. I kind of discovered we'd faced 4 problems and challenges, and there were so many gifts, but I'd love to speak about 4 gifts. So 4 challenges and 4 gifts that other people can learn from our experience.
Well, terrific. I've got some general inquiries, but let's start with these 4 gifts and 4 challenges. Maybe let's start with the 4 challenges first.
Okay, so I'll just outline them and then Jen and I can play around and expand on what we learned. So first of all, we had a look at the terrain of podcasting out there, and is a very specific landscape. So we were coming into some challenges even when we started. So one of those is what we call hegemonic masculinity in the podcasting world. So it's a male-dominated world, and there are specific reasons for that, good and bad. And so Jen and I were facing the challenges of getting our voices heard in a male-dominated industry, which is wonderful. Jen and I are not scared of our own masculinity. We love a good challenge, but there's some real issues, and we can outline those. Secondly, we really want to respect our audiences and include more women in listening. So we were challenged with gender differences in learning and using a variety of voices to reach the different learning styles. So that was a whole challenge, how to include anecdotal stuff and science stuff and the left-right brain split, blah, blah. So that was number 2, is revising how we speak. Number 3, when you step out and use your voice, there's a lot that happens. And so what I'd call the attachment authenticity split, the more authentic you become, the more people you lose, and the more people you gain. So you're stepping into authenticity if you podcast. You can't ever take that off the digital web. You've said something, you've got to stand by it, and people will split. They'll either say, wow, or they'll say, oh my God, what's she doing? So it's a loneliness factor once you step out into authenticity. So that's number 3. You get projections from everybody, and you have to defend your position. And I would say number 4 is an interesting phenomenon that Jen and I have experienced is plagiarism. So we didn't really anticipate that. And so we'd like to speak a little bit about cyber stalking. Jen and I being cyber stalked for our content, not us as beings. So there's a mixture of, we appreciate the fact that this is going down so well. We've been fairly successful, and you cannot police the internet. And every single week we dropped an episode, we had somebody just replicate that as if it was their ideas. So that's an interesting challenge of letting go of any ownership of our content, because you can't put your finger in the dike. So let's look at those 4 challenges. I'd love to hear your feedback, Ben, on those.
Yeah, I think that, well, first I'd like to talk just a bit about speaking to multiple audiences at once. And really, we tried to craft our episodes in a way where we were speaking to many people in many styles at one time, and trying different approaches, an experiential approach, more theoretical approaches, trying to hit it in a variety of ways. And what we found was, in the feedback, was that it was working, because we were getting feedback from a variety of different people who probably would never have listened to a podcast about transformation, and people who would probably run to a podcast about transformation were both giving us good quality feedback. So that was my kind of test to see whether or not we were doing what we set out to do. And yeah, I think it's anytime you give an intellectual gift to the world, the ideas are not, nobody owns ideas. We knew putting it out there that, people might take our ideas. But no matter what, I don't think that people can copy the magic that Sally and I have together. And so, you can take content all day, but the magic can't be replicated. And so we sit, pretty confidently and solidly in the magic that we have, and give the rest away without any conditions. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a great summary and cluster of challenges. Maybe let's pick into each of them a little bit. So, other than the fact that there's a bunch of white dudes with podcasts, what are the facets of hegemonic masculinity that you see and confronted in the podcast space?
Well, it's fascinating, Layman. So we did our research before we started, like who is listening to podcasts and who are they listening to and why? So those are the questions. We discovered some great stats of, the wall that we're up against. Out of the top 100 podcasts, only 20 belong to women. So the male voice dominates, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love the male voice. I'm a philosopher. But that's an interesting identity, because there's not too many female philosophers. We're not really taken seriously. But what we talk about is kind of philosophy. So we're breaking new ground, Jen and I, as female voices. So we were looking at who listens to what, and men and women have very different learning styles. Men generally tend to hear men because of their wonderful, rational, analytic objectivity. Now, the weird thing is our content, 26 episodes, is about trying to break that objective-subjective split. So we know we're up against the objective wall. We also know that we're deliberately trying to reach into the subjective to reach women, which will tend to make men just shut off, because once you start talking about those things, it's not their favorite way to receive information. So we're up against this dynamic. The actual content is to heal the object-subject split. We know the audience is split, objective-subjective. We know that most women listen to podcasts about true crime, dating, and motherhood. So how do we reach women as philosophers? How do we reach men as female philosophers? It's a very complex dynamic. And we're not afraid of that. That's the actual shift we're trying to make. So we tried to approach that by anecdotal storytelling, being vulnerable, not being overly wordy, and yet being deeply researched and scientific based. So we had to be very horizontal generalists, and it seemed to work. So our voices had to be the orange expert, the turquoise mystic, the very rational science-based researcher, and the vulnerable storyteller. That was our goal, so that we could reach a wider audience, because I think integral liminal spaces don't even care that no women are listening. They've never really analyzed why. And it's time we reached and honored them, because they just have a different learning style. So using multiple voices was our biggest challenge. What do you think, Jen?
And our biggest success, I would say. I take great pride in being able to speak across boundary lines and to people who wouldn't normally listen to me. I want to make those connections. That's really important for both Sally and I in our lives. And it was really important in this podcast. And I think we did it. You know, we tried to turn people on, not turn too many people off. You know, we really were just trying to hit a sweet spot where the information we were relaying could be, you know, received and applied in the most generative way possible for whoever was listening to it. And I think we were very successful at doing it.
So this question of authenticity and attachment and loneliness is an interesting one. Obviously, when you do things in public space, they're going to turn off and drive away and disgruntle some people. It's going to draw in people you didn't expect, and it's going to put you in an odd position of being, any public communication is, loneliness isn't quite the right word, but there's this pathos of distance between yourself and the audience and the communication, and that strangeness of having your voice separated from you and have it out haunting the world on your own, and sort of you're left as the beholder of your own voice, as if it had an agency of its own. What was all of that like?
Go ahead, Jen.
It's fun, you know, it's a lot of fun because it does become its own entity in the world, and it has a life of its own, and you let it go and your voice is out there, and it can be, and everybody has projections, everybody has opinions. And you're right, it becomes its own life generating thing that you're kind of looking at it like, oh, that's me, but it's not me. It's a ghost me, right? It's my ghost voice out there in the world. I found it to be really exciting. I think that that is the heart of art. And all creative products, is that you're producing something, there's an impact, and somebody's having an experience with what you've put out there. And that's everything we could have hoped for the podcast, was to have that kind of impact. So there is some letting go of your voice, some release of, you know, control, and an exciting participatory engagement with the world that is unpredictable and exciting.
Yeah, Layman, I think you've touched on this this beautiful aspect of transformation, which includes the voice itself. Some people would say that's tuning into your evolutionary unique self. Keegan would say that's the self-authoring. Like, once that starts, there's no stopping it, and you burn all your bridges. And that's kind of a developmental stage. It's eldering, stepping into your voice. And part of the hegemonic masculinity that we were facing is the trope out there at the moment is the masculine voice that is entirely certain. It's usually at midlife, and it's the savior trope. So up until recently, we've always turned to authority as the male voice. And Jen and I are working hard to shift that so that female voices embody that same authority. Now, that is really scary ground, because we immediately start projections from people like, who do you think you are? Like, you're a philosopher. The last time I knew you at the gym or in the grocery store. So we're trying to normalize female development, which includes integrating your masculine voice and stepping up into that power. And as soon as a woman does that, she invites all sorts of projections. So Jen and I have had to be really resilient, and we're role modeling that for women because we need female voices. And it's that trope we're up against, which is anybody with anything of value to say is a middle-aged white man with a very deep voice and a square jaw. That is representation, and it's been true up until recently. So we're up against a whole ton of legacy from patriarchy, and we loved stepping into that role. And you lose people. Sorry, Layman.
What do you learn about yourself by seeing the kinds of projections that come at you that you might not have known if those projections hadn't come?
Go ahead, Jen.
Well, we are interesting mirrors for each other. And I find that kind of information really valuable, right? So if those reflections are coming back at me and that information is coming back at me, I'm going to take that information and take it seriously because I want to know, right? So I think some people feel maybe uncomfortable with those kind of reflections back, but I think Sally and I are well enough established in our own relationship with ourselves, in our own relationship with each other, that we can handle that feedback, those reflections back, and use it to grow on all levels, in the show, in our own selves, in our relationship. What do you say, Sally?
Yeah, I think the challenge, which is an evolutionary principle that split between competition and cooperation, that's what drives all of evolution. It's what drives the voices in podcasting. Like, which meme is going to propagate? Jen and I are just meme propagators here. So as soon as you create a meme, it goes into competition and cooperation. The same principles. What Jen and I learned is you have to be so resilient because you immediately invite competition, which is part of the evolutionary principle. What we didn't expect is that would come from our own communities in some ways. That was unexpected. The beauty of Jen and I flowing together is the cooperation principle, which is the yin aspect of co-creation. And it makes it easier when we're together to face the intense competition now. We put out a meme, it's going to be fighting for its life. We gave birth to it, we've let it go, it's got its own life. But it makes it easier if we're a team. And we then have to start defending that viewpoint that you put into the world. That takes energy and resilience, and it takes teamwork. Because Jen and I basically created what we would call a feminist metaphysics. In other words, that the yin is as important as the yang, and it's not in a hierarchical relationship. Our whole podcast is about that. That is a feminist metaphysics. That takes real energy to defend. So the fact that we're a team really helps. We have lost people, but we've also gained people. That is a very novel, interesting concept. No other woman in the world has put a feminist metaphysics into the meme warfare. And now we have to defend that. Thanks, Layman, for asking that.
So let's probe this plagiarism question a little bit. And it's a tricky thing because it's a charged word, it has like this accusatory vibe to it. And I think there's sort of three very interesting questions that come up for me. One is discerning plagiarism in a world where everybody draws from different sources, and also where A lot of what we come up with is sort of an expression of the zeitgeist and of the medium and of the unfolding of consciousness in this moment. So how to tell. Another one is obviously the struggle to have integrity around who's generating what and how we keep that clean. And then that touches into competition, but it also touches into semi-unconscious biases about who is entitled to ownership of various parts of the noosphere. And then there's this third problem of how do we um, let go of control over things, partly as an existential and spiritual act, and partly as a recognition that the new information civilization that we're in, especially now as AI joins the conversation, is one in which we can't really be the owner authors of things in the same way we could in the age of the book, let's say. So those are the three areas that come up for me. How are you guys standing in front of the plagiarism question?
Yeah, I'd love to dive into that one if you don't mind, Jen, because I've tried to raise this question multiple times in our liminal community, and it's one that nobody really responded much to. And I suppose it's because as a classically trained academic, I'm a bit hypersensitive about IP. Like, we are rigidly drilled into the fact that plagiarism is unethical and you just don't do it. And if you want to use somebody's ideas, you just cite them. That's all it takes. And that's an honoring of provenance and lineage, academic lineage. So I have to watch myself, because the academic in me tends to get triggered in non-academic circles about that. So I've thought long and hard about this question, and appropriation as an artist, that's been drilled into me. The idea of you literally never appropriate somebody else's work, but then you have to look at copyright issues and intellectual property issues. So my whole life's training revolves around the ethics of representation, and that's vocal or visual. So plagiarism is a very loaded word, and I think there's legally a technical definition for that. It's like 5 words in the same sequence. So that's, you got to be careful. 5 words in the same sequence, and you have caused some breach of ethic. You've plagiarized. Our particular cyber stalker just takes our content and uses his own words. So you can't ever call him on that. So we will come up with some concept, and then the next week, different words are used, but some of the same words are used, but in a different sequence. So there's no ways we could accuse him of plagiarism, and that is his particular brilliance. He does that for a living. He's an air traffic controller of other people's ideas and rarely cites where he gets them from. So there's that. Jen and I are not going to waste our energy on that because we've got too much to create. So in a way, the vanity quotient is touched. We're grateful that people like our ideas and it's impacting. That's the whole point of podcasting, is we do want to reach people. So I'll be brief. 2 things. Yes, you do own IP. There's legal entities. You go to lawyers to protect your work. There's copyright. I'm a writer. There's copyright law. These things are real. Once you get into the metaphysics realm and the mystical realm, there's no such thing as ownership. Totally. Jen and I are completely trying to embody the inspired voice, the impersonal impact that we would love to make to shift culture. That is not even our voice. That is evolution. That is a set of memes that want to be spoken through our bodies. We're fully aware. Once you create the baby, it has its own life. You send it out into the world. Let go. So these 2 things coexist. And we struggle. Jen and I are human. We're very proud of our work. We spent a year with deep research, and then somebody listens and just iterates it as if it's theirs. That hurts. We spent a lot of time, and we've given it away for free. So all we ask is, if you use it, please just cite us. That's just respect. There's a thing called the Matilda effect, which is that in science in particular, there's a cognitive bias against citing women or recognizing their contribution and then claiming it as their own. So we're in a long history of, that's another way of silencing women, and it's the competitive meme world. So we know what we're up against, but we would just, especially our integral community, especially just ask for respect. If you've heard our podcast and you're citing that, please just cite us. We want to platform each other. That's part of shifting culture, is that we actually do support each other and we do cooperate. We don't have to compete so much and silence others or their gifts.
Yeah, I just think we're voice pieces for the universe, and it's just it's coming through us so powerfully and so intensely that if it's impacting people and they want to copy it, it doesn't. I don't have as much of an issue, I think, as Sally does. I think it really grits on Sally's nerves a little bit. I'm like, okay, fine. If that's where you want to spend your time, copying other people's work, fine, do that, but I think at the end of the day, we feel really proud of what we have put out, and any feelings we have about people doing that just arises because we really love what we've done, and when we put a child out in the world, you like people to respect it and treat it well, but that doesn't always happen, and we're aware of that. But I think that information is information. It's freely flowing. It's fast and freely flowing, and you really can't own any ideas anymore, because the person sitting right next to you is probably thinking the same thing and 10 times better and more robust and vastly than you are. So I just feel like we give it out for free, and whatever happens, wherever it goes, however it lands, however it's used or not, isn't really up to us.
I'll definitely mention you when I launch Layman Pascal's Feminist Metaphysics next month.
Thank you.
So what about these 4 gifts? What did you get? What did you discover? What was wonderful about this project?
I'll just highlight them, and then Jen can expand. Number 1, Jen was my gift. Like, I have never had such fun in such hard work turned into utter play, and it was a pleasure. So finding the right co-creative partner was so random. Jen found me on the internet. I'd never met her. In fact, I've still never met her. I'm going to go play with her in Florida soon. But so number 1, I'd say the gift was finding, and it will be a lifelong partnership. We just share so much passion, so much geekiness, so much discipline, and so much flow. Like, it's an amazing combo. I'm an old lady now, and I've never had that gift. I had to wait till this age to find the right co-creative partner. So they're rare. Number 2, I think the gift for us was learning how to be transdisciplinary. As we mentioned, we have tapped into so many silos of information, and so we've gone horizontal as opposed to vertical with our sharing of knowledge. So that's a style. It's kind of, we would say, generalist as opposed to specialist. We're not neurosurgeons or psychiatrists, but we quote Ian McGilchrist. We're not philosophers, really, but we quote Hegel. We're not feminists, but we quote identity, politics, gender that affect information sharing. So we looked at psychology, evolutionary developmental theory. We looked at pre-modern sacred texts. We looked at standpoint theory and power play, which is from feminism. We looked at, I would say, about 10 different disciplines. So that was a whole second gift, was the discipline of doing that carefully and well. That's hard. Number 3, the gift of finally stepping into eldership and giving away this work. That has been a whole different level for me, to learn how to spend the last 2 decades of my life. That's a real gift. So stepping into service. And I would say number 4, the gift hasn't been born yet. It's our future projects. So what do you think about these things, Jen?
Well, our friendship and flow and collaborative relationship has been an enormous gift on my life journey. Sally and I both went to graduate school, so we know what it's like to work with people in collaborative relationships, doing research, and we've both had we know what it's like to work with frogs, and we know what it's like to work with princes, and our relationship is a prince through and through. And so we know we have something really special in how we love and learn and create with each other. And so, yeah, that of all the gifts, and I guess this goes along with the final gift too, is that our relationship is so ripe and fertile that it's exciting really to think about all the projects that I know will arise. So that it's like the Radical Emergence podcast was the beginning of many things that will arise, not just out of the project, but out of our love for each other and our friendship and our respect for each other. And speaking to transdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity is the future. It's the jam. It's what's happening. It's hot. I love it. Transd is like my passion, my love. And so being able to apply it in this project and have that kind of transdisciplinary view, where we included a variety of disciplines and brought it in a very elegant way, that was just so wonderful and exciting. And so I'm also looking forward to how we're going to leverage that in our future projects as well. That's kind of the nerd in us, the transdisciplinary nerd coming out in us, but we both really enjoy looking at any topic through a variety of lenses to generate a more robust view of whatever it is what we're looking at. And that is what our future projects will be about.
Yeah, the article that you wrote for the Emerge platform was suffused with these little poetic interludes that were very rich with the love that you two have for each other. And it made me think how beautiful it is to have a philosophical and existential chum. It's a lovely thing.
Layman, we were talking about the loneliness of stepping up into public voice. So I can't say enough how that is alleviated by finding the right co-creative partner. And everybody's partnership, just to reassure people, will be completely different. If you find the person that you're compatible with to create something together, it's a complete joy. But for Jen and I think it was our combination of being very balanced in our left and right brains that to us, like I've never had that partnership with somebody where we can fluidly move between objective and subjective. And when we both do that, we just get into a flow and we just understand without having to say it. We want to reach a broad audience. So let's do that. Let's play on that gift. I want to speak masculine because I love reaching men, and I want to speak feminine because I love reaching women. So we're really doing that as we come together, fluid. And so there's cognitive and creative equality between us. There's no dominance hierarchy at all, which is weird. We just cooperate, and then we give up ownership. That is the extra step, which is really hard for the ego. But once you start practicing that, that's a life skill. And then the project itself is more important than us. And it arises out of mutuality. So it's benefiting from all the parts that we bring to it. And it seems to have a life of its own at that point.
It certainly does.
Go ahead, Jane.
Yeah, it does have a life of its own. Our motto all the way through was when you dance with transformation, transformation dances with you. And it seems like the more we played with each other and with the podcast, the more kind of transformative our lives became. And eventually we were just in this kind of transformative soup. On all levels, doing the podcast in our lives, with each episode, there was just so much transformation happening. It was like the universe was using us as voice. You know, the universe communicates with us through the language of transformation all the time. That's what I believe. If you want to communicate with the universe, talk in the language of transformation. And so the universe was talking to us in the language of transformation. Then we were talking outward about, using the language of transformation. And something was happening. There was a participatory synergy that was happening through us in this podcast that I think was really spectacular. I don't know if it's a once upon a once. I don't know if we can recreate it and keep doing it. I think we will. But it was really spectacular the way we were communicating with reality and allowing it to come through us and coming and also allowing it to come back to us in this kind of reciprocal way. It was really interesting. And I don't know if Sally and I didn't have such a great fluid relationship, it probably would have maybe created some tension because it was very dynamic, but because our relationship was so fluid, we were able to dance that transformative dance without getting lost in the beat of it.
Nice. The opportunity to make the efforts that practice the skill of transdisciplinarity. That's very evocative. I guess we're all in some phase of becoming an octopus now. Transdisciplinarity seems to suggest something that's a little bit above and beyond just multidisciplinarity or interdisciplinarity. It's not just a bunch of these parts. There's some other, more than the sum of the parts, mood to it. And I'm curious how you both feel about what the flavor of that is. Like what's the mood, what's the essence, what's the scent of transdisciplinarity as an ethos beyond just having a lot of disciplines in play?
Can I jump in, Jen?
Please.
Okay, so I would say that the orange voice and the yellow voice have to be deeply grounded in your subject matter. You can't just start making a noise out of your mouth and hope to have any credibility. So the hard work has to be there. There's no doubt that the discipline involved, that masculine hard work has to be there. But at some point, it's the 10,000 hours that Gladwell was speaking about. At some point after the 10,000 hours, you start to play and trust. And when you feel that comfortable with your subject matter, you can let go. And then you experience in your body that something wants to be spoken through you, whether you call that inspiration, whether you call that the muse, whether you call that evolution's voice, whether you call that the divine, whether you just call that, like Jung did, the subconscious, the upwelling from the source. That voice locates itself in a different place from the textbook. It jumps out of the textbook into your body, and that's the place you start speaking from. But I don't think you can do that without the first intense discipline of having mastered your subject. Then you just donate that as a sacrifice, and you just leap off from there and start being spontaneous. That feels like, and this is where our work needs to go next. Jen and I feel like we did the orange and yellow voice enough to speak with credibility, because you can't really do the spontaneous play before you've established some credibility of your subject discipline. But the next phase of our projects is to just be way more creative and spontaneous. So we're looking forward to that. We're going to leap off from the dry academia into play.
And I would say about transdisciplinarity, the mood of that for me is love, intimacy, real deep connection with information. Like there's window shopping information, and then there's going in and trying it on and looking at it and seeing, holding it up in front of a different mirror And transdisciplinarity to me is about moving intimately into information, looking at it. When you love something, don't you want to look at it from all the different angles? Don't you just want to see it and know it from the inside out? And that's what transdisciplinarity is to me. It's a real love affair. Name any topic, put anything in the center of your view and look at it from every different angle you can. That to me is developing a real participatory relationship with information, as opposed to just, knowing something intellectually or cognitively, right? So what we're talking about is an intimacy with information, as opposed to just things you think about, things you make love to, as opposed to just thinking about. Yeah.
So
Okay,
some people, sorry, Layman, final sentence on that is, some people have spoken about that erotic connection to your purpose, and that actually comes alive in you at some point, and it changes everything. And the passion is not something you mimic. It just wakes you up, and you actually eventually have no choice but to say those things. Like, they just want to be said. There's an urgent need to express that, and that's from a different place.
I'm curious about this eldership question. I've been pondering for some time about the ways in which the production of a new culture has to resemble the way culture was anciently produced, and that archaic metaphors of the village or the shaman or the elders, things like that, that we retrieve from the distant past of human experience, are essential ways of structuring the production of a new second-tier transformational regenerative type of civilization. And it seems like eldership is the most general form of knowledge transmission in those ancient systems. And so we have to be able to regenerate appropriately somehow a version of eldership. For myself, that's been introducing the conversation where I can, trying to, I think, encourage the people I think are elders to think of themselves as elders, so that I can template for other people entering into a relationship with them that demonstrates the way you become tomorrow's better elder by relating better to today's elders. But not everybody wants to be thought of as an elder, or there's if not a resistance, a strangeness to that shift of going, oh, okay, maybe that's what I am. Maybe I'm in the eldership mode, the eldership phase right now. And I'm curious how the two of you feel about that shift, and about what it takes to occupy the position of the elder.
Yeah, so I'd like to make a distinction between the orange expert and the elder. So I think in the West, we tend to kind of, the talking head industry of the podcast industry, which we're up against, is kind of the orange expert. So how do we deepen that? It's quite hard in our digital space to create ritual, and to be able to deepen with some intimacy and step into a different form of support and facilitation, which to me is, and mentorship, which is eldership, as opposed to a talking head orange expert. I think that's a different thing. And thank you for asking, Layman. Jen and I have been doing that, me for 3 years, Jen for, I think, 18 months, in the integral leadership room on Clubhouse every week. So those 2-hour conversations are of a completely different ilk from the orange expert. So we are trying to develop an eldering role model there, which is not to transmit information top down from head to head, but rather to encourage from the bottom up people's own gifts and encourage a safe space for voice to emerge, so that young people can step into their power and start trusting themselves. And they need a safe space to do that. It's a really scary process. And I will be quite frank, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you right now unless I'd been practicing in that room. So that is a space for eldering We have a couple of people that show up literally every single week to do the eldering, but eldering is not top-down transmission of information. It's facilitation of people's gifts. What do you think, Jen?
Yes, I agree. I think that you're right. It's about creating safe spaces, and it's not an age issue, right? There's young people who can hold incredibly safe, graceful spaces within themselves and can share that with others. Eldership is really about being able to, whatever your gifts are, whatever it is, hold it in some kind of a responsible way out for somebody else to say, this is what I've learned. What are your gifts, and how can we bring what I've learned and your gifts together in some kind of a synergy where we can both learn and grow together. So it's not this old, way of, domination and, I'm going to be your mentor and, you're going to learn from me. It's not that anymore. I think what we're moving towards is a much more reciprocal, based in equality, based in where both sides come out feeling like we've both gotten something important out of this. And if we all stepped into that, what a different world it would be, right? If we all held our gifts out for each other and said, yep, this is what I got. What are your gifts? Oh, let's put them together and see what we can, what can unfold if we take our gifts and put them together. To me, that's what really being a conscious elder is all about. It's just holding your gifts out, because you never know who in your random life may need a gift you have, right? So it's really important that you put your gifts out in the world, because otherwise, how can people find them, that may need your gifts? Which is another reason I'm so proud of us in this podcast, because we have certainly put our gifts out into the world and we're holding them out for people, and people are grabbing them and taking them and applying them to their own lives. And to me, that's fulfilling our obligation as conscious elders in the community.
So then there's this notion of future projects. And you were mentioning, Sally, the importance in your mind of securing some clarity, some mastery, some structure in the orange and yellow voices in order to prepare for a more expansive move of play and creativity and spontaneity together. My curiosity is, what are you going to do in order to find out what the form of that should be? Do you have a plan to seek out the omens of the next project?
So let's just briefly look at the upper right quadrant there of the biology, and to use the orange voice here, step into that, Sally. I refer to McGilchrist's work. I've been teaching that integration of divergent and convergent thinking my whole life. Finally, McGilchrist's book came along, his books, and I was able to say, see, there's science behind this. So my whole life, I've been helping students. I used to be at the university, access their creativity. So there's real ways to do that. And now Jen and I are going to apply those. So basically, this is why we always use the Tao as our metaphor. It's a yin and a yang practice. So we first of all have to access the intuition and the imaginal. In order to invite down the new, you have to be open and curious. You have to be receptive, deeply in your feminine, and in fact in your what we call parasympathetic nervous system. So it's an embodied practice to invite inspiration into the body. You actually have to disappear. So you invite the new in, and whether that comes from the subconscious, as Jung would say, or the muse, inspiration, divine, evolution, whatever, naming it is irrelevant. There's a process. Then you have to get into your masculine and execute that inspiration and create a product and impact the world. And that is deeply masculine. So I know, because I've worked in the creative industries my whole life, I know thousands of people who are deeply imaginal and who can't get it together to make a product. Like some of the artists I've worked with, the most gifted people, they can't even get an exhibition together. So they need to team up with a yang person, and they do. They find each other. And that yang person who can organize things, get set goals, have an opening for their exhibition, they don't have great imagination, but when they team up, they're inspired and together. So you can do that as a pair, or you can do that internally. The left and the right brain through the corpus callosum, there's stuff happening, and there's practices to integrate the brain where you can do both your yin and your yang. Jen and I tend to be not only a pair who fluidly move between yin and yang, we do that ourselves. So, we've got that happening. So our future projects, we're really going to embody that and go into, so we can't say where this is going, because we need to invite the new through our bodies and then express it and then find our yang and execute it and get techie or whatever we're going to do with it and learn the skills. To have a baby, you've got to have yin and yang. That's the creative principle. So in some ways, we've set an intention. The podcast is forming the curriculum that we've given away for free forever. But we will develop an incubator where we use that curriculum experientially, learn a whole bunch of embodied skills to go deeper into that actual real process of letting the Tao move through your body. That you can't do on the internet. Jen and I are going to meet in person. I'm going down to Florida and I'm going to hang out at the lake with her and drink margaritas. And Jen, you can perhaps share like the facilities we could access and blah, blah.
Yes. So we, a couple of things. We are already formulating an experiential container that will dovetail with the podcast. With a book, we'll have a container. Anybody who's interested in taking what we've created in the 26 episodes and going deeper, we will create a container for that. So that's one thing we're doing. But we're also really interested in creating kind of a multimedia, a digital multimedia project where we kind of take this transdisciplinary approach to a variety of topics in kind of an investigative way. Where we will produce both a video and a podcast show. I'm not exactly sure because we're still in the very early stages of how this is going to flow out. But what we see is the capacity to focus our eye on some topic and produce a creative project from it of art, music, a variety of different inputs that will create something entirely new that we really don't even know yet what that thing is going to be because we're just feeling into it. But it's the power and potential and possibility that we've cultivated in the podcast that's allowing whatever this new thing to grow out. It's the power that we've created that is giving fuel to whatever this new thing is that we're going to give birth to. So very exciting.
Mm-hmm. A yet to be specified margarita fueled curriculum infused multi-creative event of some kind.
Yes.
So
Stay tuned.
You know, there's speaking about the thing, and then there's doing the thing and being the thing. So our podcast was speaking about the thing, which is the objectivity. And that's where you get the power and the credibility and the transmission. But the being and doing the thing, that's a womb-like space. It's literally where the birth happens, but it has to be birthed with certain ritual and embodiment practices. You invite it in and you gestate. And then only then as it grows and you can look at the thing, can you speak about the thing? So there's actually a process in the body. It goes from feminine to masculine. That's why we call it the feminist metaphysics of creative emergence. If you look at it super carefully, it starts in the feminine and becomes the masculine. and then it reaches others. So there's a linearity to the process, but there's also a play between the two, which is deeply erotic. So we honor that at the deepest level, the partnership between masculine and feminine, and it's at every scale of manifest reality. So that was explained in our podcast. We won't go into it now, but now we want to do the thing, not just speak about the thing.
That's right. So we're trying to feel into how that can be done creatively and evocatively.
This this sense of the feminine receptivity to inspiration that's followed by the masculine discipline of impacting the world makes me think about the will. All right, and there's a 19th century kind of masculinist sense of the will as an almost muscular exertion whereby you force the accomplishment of an egoic desire by disregarding its other impacts on the world. But there's also this sense that that will or intention is a capacity or a power that we can cultivate in ourselves relative to our ability to find a subtle imaginal idea and be the custodian of it until it reformats the world in its own image, which is a very interesting process. And the two of you have done that. You had the idea for this podcast, and you completed the idea of this podcast. And as acolytes of transformation dynamics, I'm curious what you think is the impact of that. What changes for us by fulfilling an idea, by bringing it to manifestation? What does that inscribe into our being? How are we changed by that? What does it do for us?
Layman, that's the core proposal our metaphysics is making, is that this is developmental. So, you know, we're polarized as younger people busy in our reproductive years. Jen and I proposed that it's developmental to allow our opposite energy to bloom. So you look at the gender wars right now online, which is one of the aspects I look at for my book on integral Taoism. I have to go into those places, and they're so busy fighting about protecting the one polarity for themselves. But actually over time, and this is not in any of their conversations, so this is where my book Integral Taoism is shifting the gender war conversation. Over time, we integrate our opposite. That is maturity, that is developmental, especially after andropause and menopause. For men, after their testosterone drops, they do soften and become more feminine. And for women, our developmental journey is different. And this is integral. It's never spoken about the fact that we have different developmental paths. For women, our estrogen levels drop and we become much more powerful and clear and unemotional and logical. So this is the gift of what Jen and I've noticed is captured in the Tao, because the seed of the opposite is in the two symmetrical parts. The developmental issue is that you must bloom to include your opposite. So any incubator we have, we will be helping people with that yin-yang process of blooming your opposite. And the fact that Jen and I have finished this arduous year together, we both have very yin essences. We're very, in our beings, we're very feminine. Jen and I had to step into our masculine to execute, and we're proud of that. And that is developmental for women. Our journey is different from men. So to make any impact, we need to integrate the yang. Otherwise, you can have all this lovely essence and ideas, and it goes nowhere, just fizzles out. So you either find that in yourself and mature into that, and you will be rejected for it, because with the polarity conversations right now, that's taboo. That's a stigma for a woman to become masculine or for a man to become feminine. But Jen and I are proposing a different polarity conversation that is developmental. And that's when you become truly creative, when you integrate that yin and yang, and it's an electricity in you that just starts generating. So we did have to step into our masculine. It's not easy to do a year-long podcast. It was every 2-week cycle. We did heavy-duty research. We shared the tasks of editing and putting it together and then publishing, and it was relentless and unforgiving, but we're so glad we did it. And I would encourage other women to feel confident that they need to step up and start showing up and using their voices. They can't just be a victim and say, I'm never heard. Use your voice, then you will be heard.
Definitely. And I want to also invite the pair of ducks who are our mascots throughout the show, the paradox. The paradox of wanting and being completely focused on doing this podcast, you know, the will. This is what we're going to do. We're going to put our minds to it. We're going to do make all the parts happen. We're going to make it happen. And the irony, the paradox is that the whole time the universe has been using us. We're saying we're going to do it and we want to do it. And the whole time we're being used. We're puppets on a string doing, you know, so where is will, you know, in the paradoxical framing of things, you know, I want to go get an apple because I'm hungry for it, but actually everything in my body is hardwiring me to go get that apple, right? So I think it's fun to play in the idea of will and wanting to manifest projects and bring forth all of the wonderful things that we will be bringing forth, while also knowing that we are completely puppets on the string. And that we are moving because that is how we're moving this way in the world, because that's how the universe wants to move through us. And this is, we couldn't be doing anything else. I suppose we could be going against the flow of transformation, but that's and the antithesis of what we've been talking about for the entire podcast. We want to move with the flow of transformation. And that includes having a will and recognizing that we're all just the universe's puppets, and we are voice boxes. And at the end of the day, we are very proud to have been used in this form for this podcast. I can't think of a better way to be used than like this.
Mm-hmm. Seems like you're both pretty happy with how the whole thing went down. But if you were starting today, or if you had to do it over again, would you approach it any differently, knowing what you know now from having gone through it?
That is a weird question, because normally I would give myself a hardcore critique and be willing to change it. But I can look back and say I'd have done it exactly the same, Layman. That's so weird. I've never said that about any project. I'm really strict when I write a book. I always look back and think, yeah, I could have said that better. There are times where I could have said something better, totally. But no, I would do it exactly the same. Thank you for asking that question. I just realized.
Yeah, I would do it exactly the same. And because I know Sally and I's hearts have been on the ground this whole time, doing the work on the ground. And I think when you do that in life, no matter what you're doing, if your heart is on the ground and you're doing the work, you can't go wrong, and you can't really look back and regret anything, because you're doing your best. And we really did our best. We brought forth our best, and it will only allow us to bring forward even better things in the future. I wouldn't change anything. Yeah. And I love podcasting. I had never done podcasting before. So the entire technical side of learning that part of it was just a blast, and challenging. You know, there's a lot to know, and there's shortcuts, and so I found that part of it to be very inspiring, invigorating, and I cannot wait to get back into a new project, because I just love it. It's such a powerful medium. And like Sally is saying, you know, it's the great democratization of voices, because anybody can start a podcast. And I just love a world in which we have in which more voices have the opportunity to share. I think that in and of itself is an incredibly transformative gift that we're experiencing right now. So yeah, It's not too hard to learn, and definitely we would recommend anybody who would be interested in starting a podcast to develop those skills.
Yeah, it's a fantastic medium. I mean, there's things to learn, but at the same time, it feels to me like it's part of the new nervous system of the species, is one of the most obvious ways we have of communicating and organizing each other. And it brings uh, audio and video and the lived experience of the communicators together in a really interesting and rich way. Like I have respect for people that make very elaborate podcasts that are more like TV shows, but what my heart wants is to catch people in their lives a little bit more. That there should be something um, not so casual that you're not bringing any rigor and clarity to it, but casual enough that there's permeability and interpenetration between all the people who are on all the ends of these digital audio visual communication networks now.
Yeah, I think of the metaphor, Layman, of the fly's eye. It's a bit like our screen here that's split into three, but it's like evolution is looking out through those fractals. And to be authentic to the fractal that we were given through our DNA, that's a fractal. And evolution is looking out through us at itself and using our entire body as an instrument. And then we need to tap into, as you said, this the wiring of the internet. And I think for women, that's a little harder. We're not as technically inclined, mechanically inclined. That is one of the differences. So I would encourage women to overcome their fear of technology in particular, because we need female voices out there as well, to shift, as we spoke about, the hegemony that's present right now. And the only reason we want to shift it is because it's only generally propagating that objectivity. So if we want to have that split overcome, we need the subjective perspectives, which is the storytelling, as you said, the domestic view from behind, the chaos, the imaginal, and that is archetypically the feminine. It doesn't have to be the feminine body, but so we need a balance between that objectivity and subjectivity, and how we do it is through this technology right now. It's such an opportunity to shift that dynamic.
As you look back or feel back at this finite set of episodes and themes that you've explored, are there any that really stand out to you in terms of their energy or in terms of their intellectual content? Are there particular episodes that are sort of still with you, still unfolding, or were notable for some special reason?
Yeah, so I would say, because my lifelong journey as an expressive arts therapist is about helping folks access their creativity, there's three in the middle that focus on creativity. And in my humble view, the rest were supportive acts to those three, because emergence itself is creativity. We're made in that likeness. So how to become emergence, like that sounds too fancy to just open a podcast with that. People won't even know what we're talking about. So Jen and I made a deliberate effort to try to reach people who speak normal language. So we couched those three in the middle, how to become more creative, and our incubator will embody that. But so the rest are kind of explanatory. How do you start embodying emergence as a principle of the cosmos? That's just too weird for most people. So we had a slow build up. Even those, we were just very modest in our descriptions, and we hope to not scare people, because it's an outrageous claim to be a fractal of emergence. Nobody even understands. It's an identity problem. And like, if you're still fighting about, I'm a girl and I'm going to be feminine and I'm going to be, whatever, like, to step out of that identity, which is what the gender wars right now are all about, into this higher view of the masculine and feminine working at every scale of evolution, and then say, if you embody that, you become creativity itself. That's an outrageous statement. So we've hidden that in the middle, and the rest is kind of a supportive act. What do you think, Jen?
Yeah, I was just thinking in the beginning, a lot of the emphasis, energy of the podcast was about just trying to even describe, what do we say? What is transformation? Like, just even that is a whole episode. And unpacking that, because transformation is happening on all levels of reality all the time. And so there's so many different ways we can talk about it. And then we had in the middle a lot of, like Sally was talking about, we talked a lot about creativity and the relationship to transformation. And then towards the end, I really loved how we kind of looked forward, like the future of transformation. That was one of my favorite episodes, because, as I was researching about, like, all of these like cybernetic enhancements in the body, and like, what is that going to do to the future of transformation when we're like all implanted with all of these varieties of ways of quantifying ourselves? So for me, it was just kind of, as a transformation nerd, I think we did a good purview of transformation without obviously knowing we can't talk about all aspects of transformation. So we set out many times throughout every episode that we're not being exhaustive. But I think overall, what I really appreciate looking at all the episodes in totality is that we tried to create a comprehensive view, so that even if you never heard the beginning episodes about what is transformation, you still had a good sense of what we were talking about if you dipped in, say, in episode 12, 13, 14. You didn't, what I mean? So I felt like we did a great job at introducing the idea of transformation as always happening, and change always happening. And are you moving with the flow of transformation, or are you moving against the flow of transformation? Those ideas are dropped into every episode. So it works individually as episodes, but it also works really well as a complete container. And that's cool. I don't think we set out to do that, in the very beginning, but we did that. And that's how it came together. And
we did work quite hard on trying to be logical in how we unfolded it. So the planning before we even started on the topics, we went through that really carefully, so that we could introduce a new, slightly bigger, wider perspective each. And we keep saying, try to follow this in an order from beginning to end, because we do build on that concept and unfold it slowly. I mean, it's a shocking topic to be told that your identity is not actually limited to being a human girl or human boy. That your game is massive, and the accountability and possibility of that. So we try to unfold that slowly so we don't scare people away.
Jen, you mentioned that you couldn't possibly talk about every aspect of transformation. And it makes me curious about what almost made the cut. If there was one more episode, one more topic in that mix somewhere, what would it have been?
We did not foray too much into politics. But I think probably we would have if we had more time. But I think we would have handled that much more carefully. Because we did do an entire show about voice silence and power, and how that works. And we did talk about, but I think that our political world is transforming so fast that it's hard for us to keep up with what's happening in the world of politics for so many of us. And so I think that probably would have entered in there. What do you think, Sally?
Well, the one thing that we steered away from was dipping too much into pre-modern ideas of life after death. So if Jen and I had free range, and we knew we would lose people immediately if we start talking about ideas of life after death. So we wanted to keep it to topics that weren't polarizing. But given we had an audience that would be open to that, we would speak about flow from life to life, transformation as a learning process beyond what we would think of as one single process. So through the portal of birth and death is just another oscillation. These are very ancient ideas, but we didn't want to scare our audience or offend possible more traditional thinkers that were listening, or more Western scientists who only want to deal with science. And we gave a lot of science to ground it deeply. So mixing pre-modern and modern ideas. So Jen and I worked really hard to blend what we'd call epistemes. We dipped into ancient sacred texts, we dipped into science, and we tried to blend those very carefully without offending too many people, because you can offend people either way. And that lower right quadrant of the politics, Jen and I did bravely dip into, knowing we might lose some people, but we feel understandings of power are central to opening up voices. And that's our goal, is to help people start expressing this new consciousness. So we had to dip into some of the politics of where we repress ourselves, which is mostly the voice.
When you're working with someone who is deep and energetic, there are various resonances that provoke subtle kinds of experience. And when you're in the position of a communicator, you're also in a kind of transmitting position that invites a certain energetic conductivity, or whatever that metaphor stands for in reality. I'm curious whether you noticed any particular patterns or recurrent phenomenon in terms of the subtler and energetic experience of doing this project. I certainly notice things that repeat in terms of very subtle aspects of what I do that I don't normally mention when I'm doing it, but they're part of what I'm going through as a communicator in this medium.
Well, the first thing that Jen and I noticed is we've never met in person, but we relate to each other as if we've known each other for many lives. That's a whole weird question. Like, we relate like an old married couple. We've never even been in the same room. So what does that mean? It means is when Jen goes into her yin and she starts getting storytelling, her narrative on, I balance that by going into a scientific logical fact. So we're doing that yin-yang conversation dynamic fluidly as if we were an old married couple. Nobody taught us that. We haven't even discussed this, but we noticed in retrospect that that's how we try to keep the balance of the podcast between subjective and objective. And we seem to do that so naturally. And to be honest, Jen tends slightly towards the yin and I tend slightly towards the yang. I'm a little bit more objective in the way I conduct my whole life, and Jen is deeply embodied and much more expressive of her emotions. So we try to regulate. We've never done that consciously. It just happens. So that's one of the patterns that emerged naturally from our relationship. And it works as a methodology, which is weird. We are academic geeks. There is no such thing when you do a PhD in yin and yang epistemology, but that's what we tried to create.
Yeah, and that's not something, like you said, it's not something we talked about or tried to do. It's just something that is naturally occurring between us. And in all good relationships, there's that flow between people. And so another thing that I noticed was when we would have our 2-week cycles, just how much kind of energetic weight it felt like I was carrying for each episode, and just the massive amount of relief when that episode would go. And then, it was like emptying my cup, and, the cup would be empty, but then suddenly here we are at a, fresh new cycle, and it's time to fill that cup up again, and so that kind of, that working, I love that. I like being in that kind of rhythm of work. And it's especially delicious when you're in that rhythm of work with somebody, with a collaborative partner, where you can share that emptying and the relief of, yay, we did it. There's another episode down, woohoo. And then looking forward towards the sunshine and seeing the sun rise again, and, filling your cup up full of, for the next episode. I really enjoyed experiencing that with Sally. I think that was probably, that pattern was one of my favorite things over the year.
It was a bit like a tennis match.
Yeah.
We'd do our own research, isolated. We never talked about it. So we were left to our own devices. We'd meet for the actual recording. And by the way, we never did a single edit in a whole year, not one. So we'd never even discussed it. We would just have our conversation. We'd keep it to an hour. And then Jen would take it from there to do her stuff. Then she'd give it back to me. It was like a tennis match, backwards and forwards with our separate duties. And then Jen would publish it on the second Sunday. And so that's how we spent our whole year. So there was our own intuitive response to the topic. We did our own research, our own passion. We came together for a conversation, unrehearsed, completely spontaneous. Recorded it, very little editing, although Jen did a lot of the techie stuff. She's really into that. I would do the show notes and blah, blah. We each had our own task, and it came together every 2 weeks. So we did stuff together and we did stuff separately. And Jen has been through several addresses this year. She's moved several times. Unbelievable chaos. And might I say, I've never respected a partner more. She showed up relentlessly with complete discipline week after week while her life was a shit show of uncontrollable chaos. And Jen herself said that was her saving grace, was being anchored in her responsibility. So we kept each other going the whole year. It was beautiful, to say the truth, Layman.
Yes, it was quite a tumultuous year for me, and I'm really proud of how well we hung in there. And for Sally too, it was a tumultuous year for both of us, and we stayed committed, and Sally's right. For me, this project was a guidepost. It was an anchor point. It was my saving grace so many times that I knew I could depend on the routine of our working together. No matter what was going on in my life or, where I was living, I knew that, we could depend on each other. And I want to say also the importance of, anytime you're working with somebody, the importance of really communicating gratitude and respect for each other. Sally and I have always done that with each other. And I think it adds a certain quality to our relationship and the work that we produce. Because when you feel like you're working with somebody who really appreciates you and respects you and takes the time to say that, it just energizes you. And so little notes, love you, so proud of us, little gifts, little things back and forth, those sustained us through a very difficult year for both of us. Love each other loudly when you're working with a partner.
Which begs the question of previous lives that we will never speak about in public.
Well, that concludes my questioning. Are there any final thoughts you want to add, or shall we bring this to an end?
I feel complete, Layman, except to say, I hope this feels inspiring to other members of our community. It's been such fun and so worthwhile. I can highly recommend finding a creative partner and just exploring the possibilities. It's so much more rewarding to do it with somebody that you can trust, that meets you at every single level. Those people are rare, but if you find one, really engage them and be kind to them and love them and see what happens.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to, hopefully you'll have us for our next podcast or project, Layman, for an interview when we get that up and running. And I'm really excited about what the future holds for the two of us, because we are a powerhouse of potential. That is for sure.
I look forward to it. It's been lovely talking with you, and have fun in Florida.
Thanks, Layman. Thanks, Jen. See you soon.
Thanks.